What's up, guys? It's Dave, Duncan, and Kyle back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan Kyle and I have been checking out the new album from Swedish Metal icons, Meshuggah. The band's new album, Immutable, will be released on April 1st via Atomic Fire Records. So, this is the 9th album from Meshuggah, which follows up the 2016 release, The Violent Sleep of Reason. This album was recorded at Sweet Spot Studios in Halmstad, Sweden, mixed by Rickard Bengtsson and Stefan Karlsson, and mastered by multiple Grammy Award winner Vlado Meller, who has worked with Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and System of a Down.
I know at least one of those bands.
Excellent. That is a good start. This one, it was kind of a no-brainer for us, to be honest. We would class ourselves fans of the band
That's
for a long time, and for good reason. You know, these guys they've always been a band that kind of pushed the envelope, and in my opinion are one of the most kind of creative metal bands of the last kind of 30 years. There is no other Meshuggah. Like, many will try and replicate it, but they never quite pull it off as good as the originators. And to be honest, like, the back catalogue of Meshuggah, they very, very rarely kind of drop the ball. They have a pretty strong kind of back catalogue. Even their kind of average albums are kind of better than most, to be honest. I think that's because they are so unique. You know when you're listening to Meshuggah, there's no other band that really sounds like them.
It's difficult to do a comparison with anything except themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is where the critical level comes in. There are a few bands that create an aura. It's like when you listen to a Tool album.
Yeah.
You can only ever really measure a Tool album against another Tool album. It's very difficult to measure it against any other kind of measuring stick out there. Whereas, like, if you're listening to, why do I always default deathcore? I don't know why. You're listening to, I don't. It's always right there. You're listening to a deathcore
Maybe
album.
it's got something to do with such a predictable genre.
Hey.
Yeah, but
You
shots fired.
just you fucking calm it, all right?
But
take
that
take
name.
it back. It's not that predictable.
There's many bands within that genre that are integers of a difference of the other ones, where you can start to stack up the good and the bad. And this one, Meshuggah are essentially that they're doing like the challenge that everyone does in Mortal Kombat, where you have to face yourself. And that's basically what happens when they release a new album. So we'll find out if this. Find out from the guys here. Now, it's also worth saying, I don't know if you guys did it, but I have written down the scores that I think Kyle and Dave will have for this album. I say written down, they're on my phone, which is over here, right? So my hands are nowhere near my phone, so there will be no fuckery. But we had this kind of competition where we were like, I think I can, like, from listening to this, I think I know where you guys are going to land. And we will see how accurate we are with this. This could go horribly wrong, but it'll be worth doing it. Just adding in a little bit extra spice on top of a Meshuggah review.
I'm just getting my.
Are you just doing it now?
I was just.
I'm just adjusting my score to fit.
I was just screenshotting it so I could blow it up so you could see it on my phone. There we go.
Nice.
I'll take a photo of mine so you can edit it in.
Excellent. But
tomorrow,
even though we all are fans of the band, we all had kind of mixed feelings about the singles that had been released so far.
I also think we're all like fans of different eras of Meshuggah, which is the interesting thing. Like my favourite stuff, as much as this is going to get me shot, my favourite stuff is kind of pre-nothing. I really liked when they still had a bit of that kind of thrash about them, a bit of that nastiness. Chaosphere being my favourite thing they've ever done. I fucking love that album. I've played it to death. I think it's safe to say, is Nothing still your favourite, Dave?
I think the nothing reissue, the kind of
the
one
reissue where they went
record.
lower.
I do love that album, but Destroyer and Improve was my kind of like, this was my introduction to Meshuggah, so that kind of still holds a wee place in my heart. I do love that album as well.
What about you, Kyle? What era of Meshuggah are you
Honestly, I love it all, but my favorite that I keep coming back to all the time is The Violent Sleep of Reason. Because it was recorded live and the energy and vibe on that album was just fucking incredible, and you cannot beat it at all. Just like,
So like I said, 3 different eras. So this could go any fucking way.
True.
I'm just adding the anticipation for when
I
we
like
start
it.
talking
I like
about
it.
it. It's like hey, listen. Everything's on the line here.
That's true.
Duncan McLeish, Hype Commander.
Hype Commander.
I have one job today. That's not to fuck up. Or drink.
Tomorrow
2 jobs. 2 jobs.
TV.
Don't drink. Don't fuck up.
Oh, no drink.
The next review.
So as I was saying, mixed feelings on the single. Some was liked them, some not so much. But after hearing those singles in the kind of context of the album, how did we get on? Kyle.
Hello.
I think out of the 3 of us, you seem to be probably the one with the least issues about this, or the least moans or gripes about the singles, I think.
Which is weird. That's what
can I say? I'm a super positive person.
Yeah. How did you get on? What did you think of Immutable?
I love it.
Oh,
all the way through. I was impressed by how they have such a specific niche style, right? They have had for many, many, many years. Like you guys were saying, Chaos, Fear, and Nothing is like sort of the turning point of when they mutated into whatever the fuck they are. And they've kept that up for a good long time. And each time they sort of iterated upon it, or they've made, I don't know what, don't want to say like small adjustments, because every album definitely has its own sound and its own thing. But this time they've really pushed the bar, I think, in style of being able to take their style and sort of fold it back in on itself in a way. Like, the slow burn entry of Broken Cog is just like, okay, this is Meshuggah. We know what we're in for. No, you don't. It's like Jens comes in with his like low, raspy vocals, and it's like, I've never heard him do that before. Usually he's just screaming his ass off. And then they just go through, and then after that they bring in that fucking heavy, crushing groove, and it's just like, and then Jens starts screaming his ass off. And then track 2, it just gets even groovier, and then there's I've listened to this album a lot, and I still don't know how to express myself about it. But like, it's surprising the amount of melody they have on this, and actual melodic moments, because there's always like a twitch here and there and a twinge of it here and there, you know. It's they've got like a couple of lead parts that have some actual harmonies and melody and stuff, and you can follow the structure of it. But this time they've gone a lot deeper into that, and I think it works really well. It's not just an all-out assault and trying to count the goddamn beat. They've actually tried to, you can follow it a lot better this time, I feel, at least I could. And it's easier to get into the songs. You don't have to listen to it 15 times, be like, oh, that's okay, right. You can it's a bit more accessible, I think, and the way they've actually intertwined all these melodic parts and done things slightly differently, and it's just turned out like a whole different, almost a whole new Meshuggah. Well, they brought back their guitarist for this one, didn't they, to do some lead stuff, so I'm not surprised that it's a whole new thing. And I don't know, just listening to it over and over again, I just get lost in it so easily. It's really, really easy to just listen to this album and not sit there and try and figure it out and analyze it. And even though that's what we're doing with the review, but it's easy to just sit there and listen to it. A lot like when I was, like I said, The Violent Sleep of Reason, it just had such an energy and vibe and stuff on it. It was just like super, like you're always just blown away. But this has more like relaxed poses. It's got some instrumental tracks. It's got a black metal vibe on one of the tracks. I forgot the name of it.
Black Cathedral.
Black Cathedral. There you go. It was like, fuck me. Meshuggah's doing black metal. What the hell? And it was awesome. It was just great. The only thing I will say about this is maybe the drum production could have been a slight bit different. Sounds a bit flat, a bit plastic here and there. But for the most part, I think maybe they weren't quite done with it on the singles, because I did notice there was a bit of a difference. It sounds a bit more full on the album and a bit better and a bit more lively. So, but I mean, it didn't it doesn't sound time aligned. It doesn't sound like it's completely, studio fucked to death. It actually sounds quite natural and really raw. And there was even this one trailing outro, and I can't remember which one the song was. I should have written it down, but I didn't. But they had this trailing outro of like a bass, and it was just like, oh, that bass tone fucking made me wet myself. It's absolutely insane. And just halfway through, light the shortening fuse, which is a great song. Yeah. Like halfway through that one, where they just burst into that massive melodic, huge sounding part, and I was just like, that's when it started for me. Like, okay, this band have just folded their own style back in on itself, and like without cringing, and just somehow managed to redefine who they are, yet still staying in their very niche sort of subgenre that they're in. And I don't get how they do it, and they've done it 3 or 4 times now. In the past few albums, and I just keep getting blown away by how I keep enjoying album after album of almost the same thing, but it's just so yeah, I liked it. Not on the fence this time.
Okay, interesting. Duncan, you were more kind of underwhelmed with the singles.
Yeah, and I don't think they're necessarily bad Meshuggah songs. We mentioned at the start, they're a band that can really only be compared to themselves, but True. Music has moved on quite a bit in the last 10 years. The musicality and songwriting of bands is just exponentially better than what it was back in, the mid 2000s. Like bands now really have a great grasp of complexity in a song crafting style. You only have to listen to, we were like bowled over by bands like Cult of Lilith, who were bringing huge levels of complexity into their music, and making it sound very, very, very easy. And I think that's maybe where there's always going to be an issue when there's a huge period of time between album releases. The expectation for something truly like almost genre defining is difficult. I think on top of that as well, the assumption that we as music fans sometimes have is that time is purely spent crafting a new album. Meshuggah didn't spend 6 years writing this album, right?
No.
Let's be honest, right? Tool claimed they spent 10 years They didn't spend 10 years writing that album. They may have wrote a song here or there, but they didn't spend 10 years religiously crafting that album.
Spent 8 years partying and 2 years rushing it out.
Pretty much. That's how these things tend to work. I mean, you can write the odd riff, the odd idea here, but ultimately these things tend to be done in a relatively compact period of time overall.
And Meshuggah are pretty open about that. They've always said that, like, we sat down and wanted to do a specific thing, and we sat down and did it. So I appreciate that. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we'll lump these things in. So when I heard the Abysmal Eye, I got to the end of it and I was like, oh, right, is that it? Like I was underwhelmed. Now, granted, if you put the Abysmal Eye against many other songs I'd heard that week, it was quite a bit better, but it was just like, once again, comparing it to Meshuggah, like, is the fool's errand. You're comparing it already to a band that has solidified themselves as one of the greats. So if it's not on that level, it's kind of a lesser effort. And then their second single was it wasn't the same. I enjoyed it more, but it still wasn't necessarily what I thought I was going to get from the band in 2022. And that's kind of where I've landed with the album. I think there are moments of absolute greatness on this, like where they deliver stuff that, like Kyle was saying, stuff that you've never heard them really do before. And that stuff is kind of jaw-dropping at times. There are other bits that I think are almost, if you can get such a thing, as kind of very straight down the line Meshuggah on this. And then I think they indulge themselves in the length of some of these songs, which I think is to the detriment of the album. The album clocks in almost an hour and 10 minutes. And when we're talking about instrumental tracks, the midpoint here is They Move Below, which is almost a 10-minute track, which doesn't really do much. It repeats itself a lot, and yeah, you do get some really cool lead work in it, but not enough to merit a 10-minute runtime. I think, and it's a shame because I feel the album is starting to build up. Phantoms is a great track. I loved it. God He Sees in the Mirrors is great. Once again, I felt like it was starting to really pull a very, almost at times, a hugely industrial, monolithic vibe forward that I was starting to get behind. And then I feel that track, They Move Below, kind of loses me a little bit because it is, and there's nothing on it that is of a huge sprawling technicality that I was like, oh, right, it's surprisingly, I could never do it, but it's surprisingly by their standards a relatively meat and potatoes song. And then it's followed up by Kaleidoscope, which is fucking incredible. And it like there's, you know, but it bursts straight away, and then they get a bit more experimental with Black Cathedral, which it's cool hearing them do that. I would argue once again it's probably the shortest track on the album. It's 2 minutes. That's because that idea is a 2-minute idea and shouldn't be any longer than that.
It's more of like an interlude anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm kind of, you know, I by the time that's finished, I'm like, well, that's a cool experiment. If I never hear it done again, that's cool. It's kind of interesting hearing them do it. I'm the Thirst.
They did it, yeah.
Yeah, I Am the Thirst. Well, also kind of shows that you can play black metal inspired riffs and produce it well. Mm-hmm. So, if other bands would just maybe, I don't know, take that on board when they're writing their black metal albums, I'd have a lot less to moan about.
Stop spending your money on gasoline and put it in the studio.
Like I Am the Thirst is a great fucking song. The Faultless, a great song. Armies of the Preposterous, once again, I'm not completely sold on it. I think there's a couple of really great ideas. I think there's a couple of bits that meander a little bit for me. And then Past Tense is a head scratcher for me. It's a surprisingly, I was going to say tender. Tender's maybe not the right word. But it's a surprisingly somber and more subdued way to exit the album. Mm-hmm. But once again, I don't necessarily think it adds value to the overall sound. Right. It's very, very, very different to a lot. And maybe that's why they put it at the end. But it's very, very different. So I listened to this, unlike I said to Dave, this is a 2. Well, as soon as he told me the runtime, I was like, 2 times. They get 2 times from me. Once is the kind of critical, let's pick this fucker apart. The second listen is for my own pleasure. The third listen was more just to settle on the grade. And I'll be honest with you, this one landed not when I thought it was gonna. But at the same time, though, I mean, there are 9 albums in. This is 6 years in between albums. They're a band that keep mixing things up in the studio, whether it's, yes, it's a drummer, now it's a machine. But it is a drummer, but it's a machine. Like, they're always kind of, like Kyle says, they're always kind of reinventing themselves, but not in a Madonna way. You know, like where Madonna's like, now I do dance music because I've reinvented myself. Like, Meshuggah kind of reinvent their sound. They take the core components and they try, very much like Tetris, they try and plug it in different parts to give you something different. And I think that's where they're at their most interesting, is where they combine those elements and take them to the next level. It's almost though that when they do that, I find the stuff that is maybe more core to their sound, if Meshuggah have a sound, that those bits become a little less inspiring for me. I mean, your brain will do mental gymnastics trying to follow some of the polyrhythms. That's a given. And the production, I kind of agree to an extent. The drums didn't bother me nearly as much as they did on the Abysmal Eye from the first listen.
Yeah, me either. Not even.
Yeah, I think that's a contextual thing. I think just listening through the album, I think, you know, not as bad. I still don't think the Abysmal Eye is necessarily great, and it comes after a great song. Broken Cog is a fucking brilliant intro, just because once again it's doing stuff you've not heard the band do before, and then you get that single and you're like, if they didn't do this one again, that's fine. So I don't know, it's one of these ones where I feel like I'm damning it with faint praise. It's still arguably better than a lot of shit you're going to listen to. I will be very surprised. It's almost the Gojira effect for me from last year. I will be very surprised if this makes my top 10 at the end of the year. I've already heard a couple albums this year that I think are better than this. So, but I mean, they're still out there. They're still doing their thing. There isn't really any band like them. Dave said it. If like many bands will take a swing at it. And I think they realise, well, they find it very quickly how difficult it is, and then they take that swing back. At least more pulling back. So yeah, I am. I don't know. Like I say, I've got a particular style of Meshuggah that I really like, and to me, the bits where they mix things up in a different realm are the bits that are more exciting for me. So,
Okay.
Dave,
Okay.
he was in the car with me on Monday, coming back from Decapitated, and he was agonising, Kyle. Sweating buckets because he was like, I don't know. I still don't know. And I was like, Dave, you just need to commit. So he's had 2 days since then. Dave, have you commit?
Well, I had another 3 listens since then, Duncan.
Fucking hell.
So I did 6 listens of this in total.
Gee, I think I've listened to this the most out of everyone.
Have you?
It's been on almost constant repeat. I can't get enough of it.
I didn't like the first single. I will put my hand up and say I found Abysmal Eye really underwhelming for me. Second single though did kind of pique my interest a bit more.
Flip on it, Dave.
Yeah, I was a bit more interested in hearing what Meshuggah were going to do on Immutable. And I think, like, for an album called Immutable, all right,
Yes.
which,
Bold statement.
yeah, were we expecting anything less than Meshuggah doing what Meshuggah do? You know what I mean? Like, Immutable means unchanging over time or unable to be changed. And that title feels fitting for this album because it's basically Meshuggah. For me, it just felt like Meshuggah pulling strands of their sound from the last 10 years and bringing it all into one album with a couple of surprises, which I'll get to. But for the most part, it felt like, you know, bits and pieces of the last 10 years. That first track, though, I have to agree with you guys, is an amazing build-up. Just that kind of thunder and kind of guitar, just with the kind of spoken vocal. And then, as you said, Kyle, the first scream doesn't happen for 4.5 minutes.
Fucking
You know what I mean?
Doesn't need
It's
to.
like,
Doesn't need to. That's the
No,
thing about
no.
it. Is like so against what you expect him to do. It doesn't. Like they could have went through that entire song and not done a scream,
Yeah.
and it would not have impacted or affected my
True.
view on it at all.
the guitar tone is killer. And then when he kicks in with his vocal, that's when I was like, okay, now it's starting to feel like a Meshuggah album. And like it kind of hit me at that point. I was like, his vocal style is kind of now almost like as familiar and as important as like the guitar sound. Like it's
It's an instrument.
yeah,
It's
menacing.
utilised as an instrument, like
Yeah.
as opposed to it's not really utilised for anything out with another textural layer of their sound, and that's why it works.
Yeah, there's another
That's why he
kinda-
says the word reality in his lyrics so often.
yeah. But yeah, I love his tone. Unfortunately, as you said, the first track is followed up by The Abysmal Eye. Even for me, like even within the context of the album, it still just doesn't do it for me at all. It feels very, very safe Meshuggah track. And there was no moments in it I was like, there was no like fuck yes moments. There was nothing like, it wasn't a moment I was like, oh yes, here we go. There was none of that. It just felt really kind of flat all the way through. Like kind of like, we're kind of like driving with the handbrake on, you know, I mean, that's how I would kind of describe it. And there's just some production things, which I'll come to in a second, but then you've got the Next Again single, the second single, Like the Short and Fuse, and that track, I was kind of warming to it a little bit when I first heard it. Totally grown on me now after like 6 listens to the album. I'm really digging that single. Very percussive, very groove laden. Got the kind of classic like angular Meshuggah rhythms. Has a bit of a Destroyeries and Improve vibe in terms of the atmosphere and the lead work, which I was ecstatic about. Because as I said, that was my intro to Meshuggah back in the day, back in the 90s. And that album is still one of my favourites. And for the most of the album, you'll find little pockets like that remind you of, oh, there's a bit that sounds like Obzen or Chaosphere or Destroyeries Improve, or even some of the kind of newer material as well. The kind of low end riff on Phantoms that took me to my happy place. I was just like, I felt like I was kind of reliving the Nothing kind of era all over again. And then Ligature Marks had this like a really kind of slow churning groove, really intoxicating. And the lead work at the end of the track it's a little more like kind of proggier than usual, which I really liked. And as you said, Duncan, Kaleidoscope, another beast of a track. There's a really cool kind of key change on the main riff, which was really clever. I really liked that.
It's hard on material. It really is.
Yeah.
Like,
Awesome.
it's like it was one of those tracks that I'm like, yes, yeah. This is like this is why, like, if anyone ever hits you with, well, I just understand why Meshuggah is important. Kaleidoscope is maybe one of those songs where it was like they wrote this, fucking 30 odd years into their career, and album number 9, 6 years since the last album, boom, you
Amazing
do better.
track. Yeah.
There they are.
And then the only other one I was going to mention there was the Faultless, which I really liked as well. Really cool riff, which is it constantly kind of ascends and descends. It's really cool, very catchy, and the rhythm is really Moorish. A little repetitive, but I didn't really mind that, to be honest, because the riff was so cool. I mentioned earlier, and we've mentioned there's a couple of curveballs on it, and that's what I kind of love about Meshuggah, the fact that they can still kind of surprise me after 30 years with stuff like They Move Below, which is that like 10-minute opus in the middle of the album. I kind of disagree with Duncan here, though. I really liked They Move Below.
Yeah, I did too.
Completely instrumental. I think it's a stunning track.
I think it's a giant anchor on this album.
very, very intricate. A huge amount of attention to detail, and it kind of takes you on this like path of different extremities from the clean, almost like there's almost a kind of Metallica vibe about the intro, into some of the most disgusting riffs on the album. But for me, it was the kind of chemistry between the clean and heavy guitars. I thought it was phenomenal. Phenomenal? That's not a word. Phenomenal.
I love it. Phenomenal.
So, and
a phenomenal.
Even though there was no vocals, I didn't feel like they were needed at all. I thought the guitars took the place of the vocals and kept me just as interested. But it's also like a clever kind of bookend placement as well, right in the middle of the album. And Black Cathedral is the other track that people will definitely talk about. It's more of an interlude, but it goes right into like black metal territory, which I did not see coming at all. And it's all guitars. There's no drums, there's no vocals, there's no bass. It's just the guitars. And at one point I was like, the drums are going to kick in, right? They're going to...
No.
But no, they don't. They just leave you hanging like some kind of...
I do like the idea of the guitars being like that. I've got this really cool black metal riff and the rest of the band going, well, we're not on it.
The rest of the band just disagreed.
Not on this release. Okay.
It kind of felt like...
I'll do it myself then.
When I got to the end of it, I was like, this kind of feels like Martin Hagstrom is just fucking with us. He's just like, here's a wee black metal riff just to stir up some shit on the internet.
They do, like, Meshuggah, and I know some people take offence at this, but Meshuggah and Tool do have a very weird sense of humour.
Yeah.
When it comes to some of the stuff they put on their albums. I mean, you only have to hear that track on Anima, which is essentially, it sounds like Hitler shouting, but it's actually a German person reading the recipe for banana bread. You know what I mean? But and it's over industrial loops.
Yeah. But
I'm sure
thing...
the band thinks it's very entertaining. I, on the other hand, disagree.
Yeah. One thing I did like about that Black Cathedral, though, is when the next track kicks in, the first thing I noticed was the very first chord of the first riff has a very kind of blackened tinge to it.
Yeah.
So it almost feels like it was meant, like it was just, they've done it on purpose to kind of link the two tracks together. It's very subtle, but I did hear that and I did like it.
It's a banger as well. I love that track.
Aside from those tracks, I've heard the band do similar stuff to this before. You know what I mean? As I said, they're kind of pulling tones and streaks from their past albums into one. But I still can't help but be floored by the kind of technical skill and the songwriting on display. They are like the masters of their instruments and the style. And it is their style, which they prove once again on Immutable. Thomas Hackett is just a god amongst men. Like, what a fucking drummer. This is just like the time changes, the fills, the bass drum patterns. It's just mind-blowing the amount of skill that this guy has. So from that point of view, technically it's another great album from Meshuggah.
There's a but coming here. This is the longest segue to a but I've ever heard in my time.
However,
just get it out your system.
Couple of negatives for me. First being the length. It is 6 to 8 minutes. And that is a lot of Meshuggah to consume in one sitting. I do feel that by track 10, 11, the fatigue starts to kick in for me. I think a couple of tracks shorter, I think would have been slightly easier to digest in one listen.
10-minute.
No, keep that.
Maybe if that wasn't on the album anymore, the flow would be a flowing.
No, keep that. On the other hand, the internet is probably saying, Dave, stop being such a whiny bitch. It is more Meshuggah. What are you talking about?
Bitch, Dave.
They've 6 years since the last album. Let them do an hour and 10 minutes if they want to do an hour and 10 minutes, which is fair enough.
I'm with the internet on this one, Dave.
Yeah,
I disagree. I think at the end of the day, when a band writes an album, it's like, it depends how you listen to music. To me, an album is supposed to be listened to as an album.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start putting that hour and 10-minute package on it, I instantly start thinking, how do I fit this in my day, as opposed to I really want to listen to this.
I know, yeah.
You know what I mean? It would be fine if it wasn't like Meshuggah is a thinking man's metal band as well. Yeah, you can bang your head if you want, but if you know a little bit about music at all, or tempo, or time signatures or whatever, you tend to feel like it's not something I feel like I can casually flung on in the background whilst I'm working. I feel like I then stop working and then I'm being drawn in, drawn into the band. So that hour runtime to me is, I understand it's 6 years, but
I felt like, I've listened to it 6 times, as I said, but I did feel by the end, by the time I get to track 10, 11, I'm kind of ready for something else. I'm just ready to kind of switch off and go into something else, personally. Also, I know you guys have slightly touched on it, the production is not my favourite overall on this one, especially in the drum department. I do find the drums very flat and very lifeless on this release. And I think like part of that may be down to the fact that the last thing we heard from the band was done by Stu Madsen, the Violent Sleep of Reason, and the kit sound on that album is magnificent. It is so natural, lots of really nice kind of resonance and tone to the drums. Here, it just feels a little bit dead, if I'm honest.
To be honest, I kind of like the fact that they've in some way have acknowledged that the Violent Sleep of Reason production is so goddamn stellar they haven't even tried to try and one-up it, because it's just not possible.
Yeah.
So like, you know what? We're going to have a production that works and is great for what it is, but that album is like, that's the gold standard, and we can't do it again.
We also talked about this. It's weird that is the big inconsistency in Meshuggah's back catalogue, is the drum sound, because that doesn't tend to, unless you're Metallica, that doesn't tend to be a talking point with bands.
Yeah,
it's so strange, and I think the thing is as well, because of the complexity of the drum work, we're instantly drawn to that instrument, maybe more than we necessarily would be with other bands.
It's because it's such an integral part of how they sound. It's like any other band, you could just play pretty much any beat and play their riffs, and it'll sound almost the same. But with Meshuggah, it's like the drums and the guitars locked together.
Yeah, I could understand if it was a different drummer every album, but with a completely different kit and just like the different setups and all the rest. But it is the same guy, so it's weird to me that that's always the inconsistent talking point where we go from release to release.
Yeah. The thing is, I read in interviews, he has a lot of problems with his limbs. Like, there was one tour he was talking about, he had to like shift his leg over with his hand to get it back on the pedal, because it was like just sliding off all the time. So
he should just be playing in 4/4, Kyle.
Yeah, seriously, he should join AC/DC.
He's had some sort of issue with his hands just now as well. Some kind of skin issue.
Not fucking surprised listening to these albums.
So for me, it did kind of stop me from being, or some of the tracks having more of an impact overall, because of that kind of drum sound. It was in the back of my mind when I was listening to the album, but just a personal thing. That aside, I still really enjoyed this. Like, I don't think there's ever going to be a point where I don't enjoy a Meshuggah album. This feels like Meshuggah being very comfortable in their own skin and doing what they do. It's filled with a lot of the familiar Meshuggah kind of motifs in places, but because they stand out on their own in their own kind of separate realm, I'm not going to slate them for that. This is they sound like Meshuggah. They don't sound like anyone else. From the singles right at the start, I was kind of like unsure how this was going to go, but in the end, I still enjoyed it. I still really did enjoy it as a Meshuggah album. So, scores, ratings for Immutable. So we're giving scores first, and then we're showing what we thought each person would score. How do you want to do this?
See, we should have thought of this beforehand. I think we just put our scores up, and that way there's no fuckery. Not that I'm saying I distrust yous, but the shoe fits.
Well, I've written my score on here as well, so you can see I'm not going to change my mind. It's all written down.
Well, this is what I thought.
Kyle 5, Dave 4.5.
Yep.
Interesting.
That's what I think. Who wants to go next?
I misunderstood it. I thought you just wanted me to guess my own score. But
Guess.
I wrote it down, Duncan, so I don't forget.
there you go.
There we go.
But
So,
my
go for it.
feeling was that Duncan was going to give it a middling score, like 3.5 or 4 at the most, and Dave was going to give it higher than that.
Interesting. I've got
Dave?
Kyle 4.5, Duncan 4.
Interesting. Now, do you want to go round and ask the real grades? Well, the real grades, please stand up. Kyle, how right was I?
Yeah, you're right. Well, it's not the Violent Sleep for a reason. There's still Meshuggah, and I'm loving it. Absolutely. It's 68 minutes, and every time I got to the end of the album, I was like, give me more. It did not feel like an hour and 10 minutes for me. Really didn't. I've heard you guys say, oh, it's so long. I'm like, what? When you said it, I was like, is it?
Yes.
Oh, shit. I had no idea what.
So was that
That
a
is,
the end.
yes, it is.
Is that a 5
so it's
from Kyle?
5. That's a 5.
Yeah, that's a 5. That was spot on, Dave. Ain't no flies in this shit, baby.
Duncan?
I will say you were spot on with me. This is a 4-star album.
Oh,
It's
nice.
difficult. It really is difficult to give Meshuggah below a 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, and it's an interesting one. I don't know even if over time this is going to move up, whereas other Meshuggah albums weirdly have, though, over time. Like, Nothing is an album that I've grown to appreciate a lot more than I did when I first heard it. So, but yeah, as it stands just now, it's a phenomenal album. And you're got, like, if you're a Meshuggah fan, you're going to fucking love it. Is it going to bring many people over? I don't know. Do they care about that? Probably not. And that makes me love them even more. So, yeah 4 out of 5.
4. I actually didn't have too big an issue grading this one. I think, like, because it's Meshuggah, I instinctually just want to throw a high score at it just because they're one of my favourite bands. But if I'm, like, being totally honest and kind of, like, ranking this against their other releases, there's still, like, 3-4 albums I would probably score higher than this. And, like, for the most part, this is Meshuggah just, you know, with all their kind of usual tropes of their sound. You know, it was cool to hear little nods to all the previous albums. I dug that, and I liked the little curveballs that they kind of threw in. I didn't see them coming really, but for me it's a little bit too long. Drum sound just lacked a little bit of life for me, so it's a 4 out of 5 for me.
4 out of 5, so I was wrong.
Wow. Yeah, me too. I thought you'd be 4.5 at least.
We can't share the same grade. Track 7's too long.
So
That's the one that's going to get the comments, by the way. It's not going to be anything else. That's the one that's going to... It's not a Ghost t-shirt this time, guys, right? It's a guy holding a chainsaw before you fucking say anything. Well, the man with the Ghost t-shirt, please stop talking about Meshuggah.
Yes.
There we go.
Meshuggah, Immutable, out April 1st on Atomic Fire Records. Links below to the band, to the Facebook, to the pre-orders, all that sort of stuff. Check them out. Let us know what you think. Let us know your comments once you've heard the album. Drop some comments below. Let us know what you think of the album. That's the review. Thanks for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.